Welcome everyone to this live podcast on buying and launching your short-term rental portfolio. My name is Amir Dukic. I am the CEO of Rabu. We help real estate investors like yourselves find, buy, and operate short-term rentals throughout the US through our data tool at data.rabu.com. Today's podcast is very special. We're actually reversing roles a little bit here because in the past, I've been on one of Avery's podcasts. I'm excited to have her on mine. Avery Carl joins us today. Avery is incredibly impressive. Not only does she own numerous short-term rentals herself, but she's also helped over 1,000 clients buy short-term rentals through her agency, The ShortTerm Shop. She's also a short-term rental authority on BiggerPockets. So if you ever spend any time on BiggerPockets and anything related to short-term rentals in the forums or any of the blog posts, Avery is usually associated with that. So really well known there. And as you'll see in the background of Avery, when she starts talking here and introduces herself in a second, she's also an author now. She recently released a book, Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth, which is available on Amazon. So couldn't be more excited for Avery to join. Avery, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Before we get started, because I have so many questions for you, Avery, just a quick housekeeping. Guys, we would love to make this as interactive as possible. So please use the chat feature to start asking us questions. We have a couple of team members in the background that are collecting your questions, and we've reserved some time at the end of this live podcast to answer your questions. So please start sending the questions in as you get them. And looks like we have some people already commenting. They love your book, Avery. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
With that said, why don't you give us a little bit about your background, introduce yourself, and then also the short-term shop, because it's fascinating.
Yeah. So my name's Avery Carl. I have a book called Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth, a podcast called The ShortTerm Show, and I'm the CEO and founder of the ShortTerm Shop. So we are short-term rental specific real estate agents we're in 19 markets now, and we specialize in not only helping our clients find the right property, but also in teaching them how to self-manage so that they don't have to pay a property manager 20% right out of the gate. We can talk more about that later. What else? I got into short-term rentals kind of by accident. I got into real estate by accident. I was working in the music industry in Nashville as a marketing manager, and my husband and I just decided to buy a rental house because we had a little extra money. We didn't really even know it was called real estate investing. And we said, well, we were big Dave Ramsey heads at the time, not anymore. And we thought, well, maybe if we buy one of these houses and we rent it, so we're not having to pay the mortgage, then in 25 years, when our future children eventually go to college, then we'll be able to just sell it and pay for their college out of that appreciation instead of having to come out of pocket. And we thought we were so genius, and nobody had ever thought of that before. So we did buy one, and luckily, as a long-term rental that we paid $122,000 for, it cash flowed $1,000 over the mortgage a month, which
amazing.
Yeah, was a home run for a long-term rental. We didn't know that at the time. And then also we noticed that it doubled what my take-home income was after all the deductions on my W-2. So we said, wait a minute, we just doubled my income off of buying this house that we don't really have to do anything with. So then we were like, okay, we want more of these things. We want to build a business out of this. And then we started listening to podcasts and actually educating ourselves on it. And we had just a little bit of money left. And we said, well, what can we buy that's going to make us the most amount of money, the fastest, so that we can go buy more? And we landed on short-term rentals. We knew we didn't want to do it in Nashville because where we were living, because the regulations were just so constantly changing. We could not afford to buy something and be told later we couldn't use it for that. So we landed on the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. This was before it was a big deal back in 2015. And we said, well, everybody stays in these cabins when they go here. We stayed in a cabin. All our friends stay in cabins, and somebody owns these. Why can't it be us? And at the time, the reason we got into self-managing is because the average property management split in that market at that time was 40% of your gross. So we were like, we cannot afford this. We need that 40% so we can go buy more houses. So we just kind of figured out how to do it. Guys, this was back before there were no influencers, there were no courses, There was no YouTube content on it. And we just kind of figured it out. Scaled 1 to 5 over the course of about a year and a half. Now we've got 250 doors. 8 of them are short terms. They're not all short terms. And we kind of treat our short terms as just like cash flow turbochargers. They're really like a an important part of any portfolio. There's a lot of short-term rental influencers out there who will tell you short-term rentals are the right and only way. I don't agree with that. I think they're an important part of any portfolio, but you do need to have other types of real estate like multifamily, single family, long-term. So that's what we do. We have a little bit of everything.
I love it. And I couldn't agree with you more. Short-term rentals is part of your portfolio, part of this diversification, not going all in. It's also interesting. So many real estate investors just fall into it by accident. They think they're doing something, maybe to offset some bills. The next thing they know, they have a portfolio. So very normal. I also love that you educate yourself through podcasts, and now you're kind of paying back to the community by doing podcasts and educating others on the opportunity of short-term rentals. That's absolutely amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about where all short-term rentals shop? What markets do you guys serve?
Yeah. So it's a lot of them now. Our first office was in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, Blue Ridge, Georgia, Gulf Shores, Alabama, Galveston and Crystal Beach, Texas, the Hill Country of Texas, Broken Bow, Oklahoma, Scottsdale, Arizona, the Cascade Mountains in Washington, Branson, Missouri. We are in 4 markets in North Carolina. So the Outer Banks, Carolina Beach, the High Country, which is a mountain market, and then the rest of the Western North Carolina mountains, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And then we are in 4 markets in Florida also. So we're in the Emerald Coast, which is Destin, Panama City, 30A, Pensacola. Then just east of that, we're in the Forgotten Coast, which is Cape San Blas, Port St. Joe, Mexico Beach, and St. George Island. And we are in the Sarasota area. There's some regulations to work around there. So it's kind of a wide area. And then also outside Orlando. Yeah.
So I noticed something immediately, right? And I think this is part of kind of what you educate others on as well, is that it's very much vacation market focused, much less so urban, a lot of drive-to destinations. Is that fair to say? Because you typically don't do much in urban areas. I know you alluded to Nashville and why you didn't do it there. Nashville, a lot of instances, is an extreme because of the demand that it has from vacation, even from vacation demand it has. But can you speak on that just a little bit? Why such a focus on vacation markets versus urban?
Yeah. So we focus on, it used to be just solely true vacation markets. Now we also have some in what I call vacation-ish markets, and I'll get to that in a minute. Nashville's an urban market. People go there, but like Nashville's, I would not classify Nashville as a vacation market because it doesn't depend on that. It doesn't depend on vacations. So when I say a vacation market, I mean these areas, if there was not tourism, they would not exist. The reason for that, I try to focus, with the exception of a few markets, on mature vacation markets. So these are areas that are dependent on tourism. There's not a lot of hotel presence, not a lot of primary homeowners. There's always going to be a few people that live there, but because hotel presence and primary homeowners are the 2 biggest contributing factors to anti-short-term rental regulations. So in Nashville, for example, there's a lot of other industry outside of tourism. So there's a lot of primary homeowners whose income does not depend on tourism. Like down here in 30A where I live, not all of us own vacation rentals, but the people who do live here full time, their income, they're typically small business owners whose income depends on the tourism. So they're not going to be anti-short-term rental because the tourists have
that's a livelihood, right? Yeah, it makes complete sense.
Yes.
Would you ever recommend somebody from your perspective invest, or have you helped clients invest in non-vacation markets, in more urban markets? Or do you just say, hey, that's just not my cup of tea, I'm focusing my clients on really the vacation or vacation-ish markets?
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with urban markets. There's plenty of people that are making great money doing urban markets, but it's because of my experience with clients in Nashville that I try to stay away from those. So with Nashville, we had an office there. And what would happen, so they would continue changing and downzoning where you could actually do short-term rentals. And eventually it got to the point where, so obviously all the developers are snatching up the small areas that you can short-term rent, building condo and townhome buildings for short-term rentals. And after about my 5th lawsuit in 1 year between a client and a developer where they'd sold them, yes, this is legal for short-term rentals, non-refundable earnest money. Like there's no way you can't, like they would not let you buy it unless it was non-refundable. 2 years later, when the house is done, oh, sorry, this is no longer short-term rentable. I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to advise people to buy here anymore. It's just too much. So there's plenty of people that make great money in Nashville. For me personally, and what I recommend, it's just too much pushback. I don't want to deal with that. I'm in my mid-30s now. I don't want to deal with pushback. I want the path of least resistance.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a lot to be said about that. I think you probably agree that Nashville is a little bit of an extreme example as well. Of course, there's some regulatory risk everywhere in Nashville just because of the, I think we had a guest mentioned, Alicia mentioned that it is both a urban and a vacation market. It is quite a bit of a vacation market because, so many bachelorettes and everybody comes down for the music scene. But I think it kind of goes in hand with what you mentioned, is that most people's living in Nashville is not made off the vacation rental market. So there's going to be pushback from an affordable housing perspective, from things of that nature. So I completely agree. Nashville is not something that is high on kind of the list when Rabu recommends properties either. There are definitely opportunities in urban areas, but you're right, they're more risky. And you have to kind of look at alternatives. If you're going to go into urban markets, you have to do some analysis on alternative usage of the asset, whether it's reverting back to long-term rentals or potentially even kind of the midterm monthly rentals as well as a backup option in case there is some regulatory kind of constraints that occur over time.
Yeah. Awesome.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about your process on actually finding short-term rentals in markets and how's that evolved since you started?
Yeah. So for finding markets, it's kind of the same as it always has been, which is the mature regional drivable vacation destinations. So I'm always kind of keeping it. I mean, I can give you the hard version or the easy version because there's a lot of, there's several data companies now that put out best places to invest in terms of short-term rentals. Not all of those places are going to be something that makes sense for us. We focus again on the regional drivable. Right now, we are focusing more on opening more affordable markets. Now, we did just open some that are not as affordable, just because we had, different contacts that were like, hey, we want to come work for you and we live in this vacation market. But in terms of like outreach for us, we just opened Shenandoah, Virginia. We've had Myrtle Beach for a while, but Branson, Missouri, and then the Western North Carolina mountains are all very affordable compared to like the Smokies in Tennessee or Blue Ridge, Georgia. So with interest rates being kind of rough right now, people don't want to spend $1.5 million like they did 2 years ago. So we try to listen to our clients and what they want to pay and what they can afford and trying to tailor our markets so that there's something for everyone. So the criteria is still the same, but as of right now, the way the economy is, we're trying to make sure we have a lot of affordable options.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I guess related to that question, have you guys started pushing out of some markets? We've kind of heard, some activity in Tennessee, for example, in Tennessee mountains. There have been such an influx of supply up there, for example, Chattanooga area, that, the returns aren't as great. Are you seeing any of that from your perspective and as a result, pushing people elsewhere in some of these more affordable markets?
Yeah. So I kind of separate the markets that we're in into two categories: blue chip markets and emerging markets. Blue chip markets, and it's not what you think it is. So I'll explain it. So the blue chip markets are the areas that are very established in terms of having a lot of sophisticated managers. So the Smoky Mountains 5 years ago was not a blue chip market. It was a bunch of, excuse me for being rude, but like old lady property managers that weren't optimizing anything. They weren't using Airbnb and Vrbo. They were like, Airbnb, that's for like hippies and college kids. And they weren't using any kind of pricing tools. They just had these like very bare bones websites and relied on that. And now there's not really that many more short-term rentals in Sevier County than there were 5 or 6 years ago. But there are a lot more people, like I would imagine all the people on this call, who are optimizing technology correctly, optimizing pricing tools, all that stuff. Whereas emerging markets are the markets that I think are kind of like what the Smokies were 5 years ago. where there's not a lot of great data yet about what you can do because there's not a lot of really great managers, whether they're property managers or self-managers.
Right.
I mean, there's not a lot of great managers in terms of optimizing technology. So I call those emerging markets. They're not emerging to tourists. Tourists have been going there for decades, but it's still very living in the past in terms of management. So like our blue chip markets would be the Smokies, Emerald Coast, Florida, Broken Bow, Oklahoma, Gulf Shores. And then our emerging markets would be the Forgotten Coasts of Florida, Western North Carolina mountains, Shenandoah. So those areas there's not going to be as much good data because there's not many people who are managing well. But when you actually like use the enemy method and go in and look at the types of properties and how they're being managed, you can kind of see like, oh man, yeah, I can do a lot better than this because my listing is going to be good. I'm going to have pro photos. I'm not going to have the same price at every single night all year. So that's kind of the two that I look at. So to answer your question, we're not necessarily pushing people out of some of the markets that are that have more properties. And I want to say too that a lot of people like to throw around the word saturated, and some markets can be, but just because there's a lot of rentals in a market doesn't make it saturated. It just makes it popular. The reason that there are a lot of rentals in a market are because the tourists come.
There's demand.
Yes. So there's a reason. So even if a market is saturated, if you're a good manager, you're going to outperform everyone. So if it depends on the client, whether I say like, okay, yeah, let's go Smokies or let's go Orlando. These places are, there's a lot of rentals, a lot of competition, but you know what you're doing, you'll be good. Whereas some were like, you know what, why don't we scoot down to like Western North Carolina and try this first? And then if you really want something in the Smokies, we can do that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Completely agree. We quite a bit talk about the fact that short-term rental, the market in general, is just becoming more professionalized, right? You mentioned those kind of more legacy operators in some of the Smoky Mountain markets. They're now being replaced by groups that utilize technology to optimize their returns and realizing that they can't just take a property, throw some IKEA furniture in there and expect to generate amazing returns. It's all about how you set the property up, the kind of hospitality that you provide, and what you do to stand out from the competition. If you do those things well, you're always going to have a really nicely cash flowing asset. So that's incredibly important. What is your advice to, I know before this call started, before the podcast started, we were asking some of the attendants to let us know, if they have any short-term rentals right now. And we had, I think, a good percentage of the first few that kind of talked about, that introduced themselves, mentioned that they actually didn't have any rentals yet and they were looking. What's your go-to advice to somebody who's first getting started?
Well, if you want to come work with the short-term shop. So our markets, we've already vetted the markets. We've got 19. We're opening a 20th at the end of the summer. So we've already gotten the markets vetted. The biggest thing that is going to determine where you buy a lot of times is going to be your purchase price. So under 500, I would go Branson, Myrtle Beach, Western North Carolina mountains, Shenandoah. If you want to stay under $1 million, Scottsdale's awesome. Orlando's awesome again, but those are more sophisticated markets. So you are going to have to make sure that your property is like great. And it just kind of depends. I mean, it just depends like everything.
Yeah. So one piece of advice would be just to go to the short-term shop website, see the markets you're in and start looking there, and reach out to your team, right?
Yep. And we're happy to help you and help you figure that out. But purchase price is going to be like a big determining factor. Of course.
Yeah. That makes sense from a market perspective. When it comes to like, what are the things that a property must have? Are there like the top 3 things that a property must have for you to kind of recommend it to a client?
It's going to differ by market, but to be general and applicable in any market. So you want to buy a property that is the aesthetic of what the tourists have come to expect in that market. So what I mean by that is mountain markets, typically they want a cabin experience. Beach markets, they want like a beach condo or beach house. It's like bright colored or white is the new beach house color. You don't want to go into like a mountain market and buy a 90s, house that like your parents lived in when you grew up. It's just not going to work. Like a weird suburban house, which would not be weird in a suburban setting, but would be weird in a vacation setting. And like a brick ranch home isn't going to work in a mountain market or in a beach market unless it's like really completely redone. So you don't want to buy something that doesn't fit the aesthetic of what the tourists are coming to visit. In terms of size, I get a lot of questions about what size should I buy? So the best size property for you to buy is the one that you can afford. So I started with 1-bedrooms and studios. I now have several 4 and 5 bedrooms, but I still have my 1-bedrooms and studios. So I would personally recommend, if you can get a 1-bedroom now, get that now and start letting that cash flow roll in. Because what happened to me actually, when we bought our first property, our first long-term, we had a budget. And over the course of time, it took us to save up for that house. It was 1.5 times like what it was when we started.
Yep.
So what I don't want you guys to do is say, oh, I can get a 1-bedroom now, but I'm going to save for a 4-bedroom. And then over the course of time that you're saving for a 4-bedroom, something changes in the economy or prices go up and now you can't get anything and you're stuck with nothing. So I would say buy what you can afford. Make sure it's the right aesthetic for the market that you're buying in. And then the third thing, if there's any kind of value add, especially the way that the economy is now and that the real estate market is now, if there's any way you can add value, and there's 2 ways to add quote value. What I mean is by adding equity to the house, but there are things you can do that will add income to the house. So that's a little bit different. So for example, the most recent house that I bought for short-term is on Cape San Blas in the Forgotten Coast. It was listed as a 3-bedroom, had really terrible pictures, and I'm sure 1,000 investors scrolled right by it. It was in the height of everything in 2021. I got a $75,000 discount because other people weren't looking at it because the pictures were bad. And also, there was a partially finished storage room on the first floor that all it needed was flooring and paint. And there was a half bath already that we converted to a full bath. And now it's a 4-4, 1 tier off the beach. And I paid $75,000 under what a 3-bedroom price was at the height of the market. So if you can find any little way like that to add income and or equity, then definitely do that.
Love that. And I want to echo everything you said. First of all, when selecting a market, and I think you mentioned you did this with your husband when you first got started as well. If it's somewhere where you as a traveler want to go to and spend money at, that's probably a good place where other people will follow, right? So follow kind of your instinct. Where do you want to spend time and money, right?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And then I would add one thing to that. So A, yes, but B, I've had some people who are like, the Smokies is kind of redneck, or Branson's kind of redneck, or Destin's kind of redneck. I would rather not go. I'd rather go to South Florida. But you also have to take into account like where the returns are. And so you want to look at the house and say, would I stay here? My husband calls it the football test. Would I sit here and watch football on a Saturday?
Love it.
So the market may not be like, yeah, if I'm going to go to the mountains, I'd rather go to Montana than shoot up to Tennessee to the Smokies. But the houses in Montana don't make the same money that the houses in Tennessee do. So I'd rather make my money in Tennessee and go on vacation in Montana. So yes, you want it to be a place that you would stay, but it might not always be like your favorite vacation place that you would go.
For sure, 100%. And the other thing I wanted to echo too is get started. Just get started. There's no need to analyze it too deep. If you can afford something that's a 1-bedroom, as you mentioned, Avery, start there and kind of learn how to operate short-term rentals. Learn how to learn the ins and outs and learn how to improve it. And then the last thing, and this is a little bit of a plug for one of our tools, but if you want to do what Avery is doing and kind of mention and find value add for the asset, use a market data tool, see what different amenities can actually generate you more money and potentially make an investment in a hot tub because it'll make you more in the Smokies. It will pay more and pay for itself in the Smokies, for example. So there's some really interesting opportunities to increase revenue as well. Let's move on to the other side of the equation, Avery, because I really appreciate your mindset on this. And it's different from Rabu because we have operated as a property manager. We've operated units for other individuals. You don't believe in that, or you don't recommend that. So I found a place through the short-term shop. You've helped me buy it. what do you recommend I do next?
So I don't not recommend property managers. There's definitely a time and a place for property managers. But if you are in the same place that I was, where I was really in growth mode and trying to build my portfolio, that's the time for self-management. If 10 years down the road, you've got a portfolio that's generating like 2 million a year and you're sick of managing your short-term rentals and you're ready to be in like cruise mode, by all means, put it with a property manager and be done with it. So there's a time and a place, but most of the people that come to us are in that growth phase. So we teach them how to self-manage. So what we do at the short-term shop is once we've got your property under contract and we know like, okay, this is the one you're going to buy, this is what we're doing here, then we have a whole training program to teach you everything you need to know about managing it. So from how to set up your Airbnb and Vrbo listings, to how to use all the property management softwares, to your pricing tools, all the way down to helping you find your local boots on the ground like cleaners and handymen. So that's kind of what we do. If you're starting from scratch or buying in a not short-term shop market, you really need two things. You need a property management software. Maybe this is a question we get into later, and a pricing tool. You want to do that later?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it now because it's interesting. So property management and pricing tool, property management software and a pricing tool. What would you recommend? Because those are definitely the first two places to get started. What is kind of your go-to recommendation?
There's a lot of property management softwares out there right now, and a lot of them are really good. The difference between a lot of them is that each of them have like one thing that they do really, really well. And we use Hospitable because their messaging is their strong suit. Like Hostfully is another really good one. And their thing is it doesn't have like a ton of features within it, but it plays really nice with all the other software out there. So you can integrate basically everything. But Hospitable is my favorite. And then Price Labs is our pricing tool. There are a few other ones. There's Wheelhouse, there's Beyond Pricing, but I think Price Labs is the most robust, in my opinion. It's my favorite. So we use those two. You need two people to start off, your cleaner and your handyman, and you can kind of build your other more specialized vendors out from there. Like if you need a roofer or an HVAC person, typically those first two people will know them and will be able to give you some recommendations. So those are the four things you need to start. In terms of hardware, you definitely need an electronic lock. You need a Wi-Fi thermostat, not a Nest, because those are made to learn what you like. And if you've got different people in there every 3 days, you don't want something that learns. It's going to get weird. We use a Honeywell T9. And you also want to have and this is a very sticky subject for a lot of people. You do want to have like a Ring digital doorbell or floodlight cam so you can see what's going on in the front of your property, but don't stare at your camera all day, every day. That's just going to get you in trouble. It's there to refer back to if there's an issue, but don't sit there and look at it all day and say like, oh, be yelling at your guests because they brought in one extra person or something. It's weird. Yeah.
Turn the notifications off. Check it only if you need to, but it's a good safety device to have. Also make sure to mention that is present in your listing as well, because you can get in trouble if you don't have that listed. On Airbnb, big trouble. So make sure to do that. I couldn't agree more with the technology you actually recommended. A lot of those groups we're partnering with. Just on the cleaning side, real quick, because that one's a little bit interesting. How have you kind of helped groups, or how have you told groups to source a cleaner and a maintenance team? Is there resources that you pointed them to?
Turno is out there. There's a few other ones. But where I found mine is just like asking other hosts. The easy way to do it is to go into the local short-term rental Facebook groups. For most of the big markets now, there are short-term rental specific, market specific Facebook groups that you can go in and just ask. But keep in mind, like, I will never recommend my cleaner anywhere in a Facebook group because I don't want her to get too busy for me. So there's going to be some of that going on. Make sure though, if you are getting recommendations for any vendor on a Facebook group, make sure that the person who's recommending them has actually used them, because a lot of times they have these in real estate agents, the real estate agent world, and they have them in other industries too. But a lot of people don't realize there's these things called fan clubs that you pay to join. And basically what it is anytime someone asks for a recommendation for a certain market in a national group, everybody who's in that fan club jumps in and names that person. A lot of times you'll see that maybe the person's like 2 hours away or not in the same town, and there's like 1,000 people recommending it. And you're like, there's no way all these people have worked with this person. That's usually a sign that it's a fan club. But if you just ask when someone recommends someone, hey, did they sell you a house? Did they clean your house? Did they, put a roof on your house? And make sure that it's actual experience and not just people doing that, then you're in good shape.
Yeah. Again, on the same page there, I would say turnover, or formerly turnover B&B is a good option to at least start looking and finding and talking to cleaners. You definitely want to meet with them as well and kind of get their vibe when interviewing them. And you should definitely interview them. So Turno is a good resource. Facebook groups are right, but Avery's 100% on point in saying that you're not going to post your cleaner on there if they're really good and you're afraid of them not cleaning for you, because your cleaner, especially if you're managing remote, is your greatest asset. And that's something that you should spend quite a bit of time searching and doing diligence on because they are your eyes and ears on the ground there. Let's move on to some of the mistakes that you see people make when investing in short-term rentals. What would you say are some of the top ones, some top pitfalls that you try to help groups avoid when finding the first investment property?
Oh, that's a tough one. It depends on the market. So like, for example, in 30A down here in Florida, there's so many people that it's like their dream to own something here that they will buy something in an area that does not work, that they're not going to make money, like on the wrong side of the highway. So Highway 98's here, guys. And then there's all the houses and the beaches here. You don't want to go north of Highway 98, but people will be so desperate to own something here that they will buy something and argue with us north of 98. And we're like, no. And then we're like, well, I mean, we'll sell it to you if you really want, but like, this is not going to do what these down here will do. And then they don't really do well. So we struggle with that sometimes when people they want what they want and they don't really want to listen to the investment advice, which I get it. I get that way too. Let's see. The biggest one that like had to have a team meeting about this morning is people wanting to do glamping in tiny homes. So that's all great, but it's not just as easy as going and buying 50 acres that are unrestricted. Unrestricted doesn't actually mean unrestricted. It's not just going and buying 50 acres and plopping down a bunch of domes and tiny homes and whatever. You have to, a lot of times the county has to approve things, septic situations. They're going to make you subdivide in a lot of cases for each little structure that you're doing. And it's really, really hard to do. We've had some big names in the industry buy with us to do that. And then 2 or 3 years in, just be like, never mind, I'm not bothering with it. I can't get it done. So a lot of people want to do that because it's really cool and fun. And like, it is cool. It's awesome, but it's really, really difficult to do. And by the time you get anywhere close to having that even approved to start, you could have bought 3 or 4 houses and are already making money on those. So I would just be wary of the glamping thing, because yes, it is cool, but it's not as simple as just putting some tents up some places.
So true. Everybody's it's kind of that idea that you have. You'll be hanging out with your friends, like, you know what we should do? We should buy a piece of land in the North Carolina mountains and buy a bunch of RVs, put them there, and it'll make it easy, and we'll make a lot of money. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to it. We've on our end, we've also seen many of those ideas come by, and even something as simple as like putting a tiny home on one lot. We've seen the owners, the investors come to us and say, "Hey, this will be ready in 3 months." 3 years later, they haven't even started, and it's cost them significantly more than they would have ever anticipated. So true. We have a lot of questions that have come in that I want to get to. So guys, please send us some more questions. But before we do that, just one last question, just because there's been a lot of talk about Airbnb Bust. And I just want to get, what's your take on it? What are you telling your clients when they approach you and ask about that specifically?
Yeah. So I think the Airbnb Bust is kind of a product of the real estate investing subculture as a whole. I think there was it was a a combination of COVID and cheap money and a lot of content going out at the same time of people saying how easy it is, how you can make, $10,000 a month with no money down by using somebody else's down payment to buy. And there was a time a couple years ago when you could just throw a porta-john on Airbnb and make money off of it. And you didn't have to maintain it. You didn't have to tweak your listing ever. You didn't really have to manage anything. It would just make money. And now that that time in history is kind of over and it's back to what I would call normal. It's back to normal in the short term.
2019 levels, right? 2019 pre-COVID levels. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, we're still significantly ahead of where we were in 2019. And I think it's because we have so many reviews now. But there's a lot of people that got into the space that did not need to be here, like people who just thought this was cool and we're going to tell their friends about it and not looking at it as a business, not looking at it as an investment. And then a lot of people who got lazy and spoiled with how easy it was at the height of everything, when now it's not busted. It's just, you have to run it like a business because that's what it is. So I think a lot of FOMO buyers, a lot of people who don't really want to do the work that are now having a little trouble. So it's definitely, the economy definitely has slowed down. I'm not arguing that point at all, but I think there's a whole lot of people who are like, oh, I thought I was going to get rich really, really quick and not have to put any money down. And I was going to buy a $150,000 condo in Branson and make $2 million. And that's just not real life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier and where our stance on it is that the asset class is becoming professionalized, right? You just have to operate it better and find the right property. You have to be smart about the way you approach it. I mean, and demand for short-term rental is still going up. Airbnb had an earnings call a couple of days ago because they're a public company. And again, their revenue is up, demand is up. You just have to know how to present the property, which is your asset. In this instance, if you think about it from an investor perspective, you have to present the asset and operate it accordingly to continue getting the returns. And now, if you're buying now, also, the interest rates are going to have an impact on your return. Right, because you're paying high interest rate, but beyond that, it's still a great place to invest in. I know we have a bunch of questions that I'd love to jump to. Some of these are interesting, talking about market specifically. Some are talking about operations, so I'll kind of go through them one at a time. First question we have are: if you're buying a short-term rental from an investor that already has bookings in place going forward, what is the best place? What is the best way to do that to retain those bookings? First of all, do you recommend people doing that? Do you do a lot of those type of deals where you're helping groups acquire existing short-term rentals? And if so, what are some options to retain bookings?
So a lot of people might disagree with me on this. I would prefer to not have to take on their bookings. I don't want their bookings. I don't know what their vetting process is for guests. I don't know if they rented to 27 bachelor parties for $10 a night in a row. And then also, aside from that, the guests are going to be already a little bit annoyed when they come into your property because they had to cancel and rebook with you. So they're just, when they're already a little bit annoyed, they're going to be more sensitive to like, oh, there was some dust on the floor. Oh, this bed's not really that comfortable after I already had to rebook. So it just creates too many little tiny micro negatives to result in a larger negative that I just don't really want to. And then you see a lot of times sellers want to get really cute with, well, yeah, you're going to honor these bookings, but I'm going to keep a 10% procurement fee or whatever. And there's a lot of hangups when it comes to trying to take over future bookings. So if you're in a state that doesn't require it, if you can get out of the deal or into the deal, out the door without having to take on their bookings, that's what I recommend. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just have to suck it up and take their bookings, in which case I would just get the prices at which they were booked and the dates that they booked and just honor that, have them email the guests your contact information so they can rebook with you.
Yeah, and I think that's all very fair points and true. I think the one thing also worth noting there is that Airbnb doesn't make it easy. You've been alluding to here in your conversation, in your points, Avery, that you basically have to ask the guests to rebook under your Airbnb listing and profile. It's highly common. We've seen it done. We've done it before, where The only other option would be to do what's called an account takeover. You basically, as part of the acquisition, also buy their Airbnb account or include the Airbnb account, and then you continue honoring their reservations by turning their account into your account. But that's complicated. You have all kinds of information on there, including some of their like personal travel history, because Airbnb doesn't allow you to transfer listings and reservations between accounts. You literally have to take over their existing account, and that's very messy. So the cleanest way is to not do it at all. The next cleanest way is likely to offer the guest to rebook it. The third way is to do account takeover, which means you just basically take over their account, but that can become extremely complicated, and the seller might not want to do so. Hopefully that helps answer that question. The next question is market specific. Avery, which markets do you think will experience the next short-term rental boom, like the Smoky Mountain State? Is there something that you are that's high on your list of markets that you're excited about, besides what's on the site, right? Where you guys have a presence?
So this is not necessarily for strictly cash flow, but I would really like to own a property in Wyoming, and I'm just trying to find a market that makes any kind of sense, even just to own, just for us to go to and then put a dent in its own expenses when we're not there, more of a lifestyle purchase. And so that's my current task, is trying to find something that makes sense in Wyoming.
Makes sense. So Wyoming is definitely an interesting one. Next question is actually Rabu related. It was about what are the revenue estimates on Rabu based on trailing 12 months? People are wondering on our tool, because 22 was amazing and this year is not looking as great. How do we come up with the estimates? Basically, the best way to put it is that we look at forward-looking data and then compare that to booking trends pre-2020. So we look at booking trends that were in 2019 and before. From a seasonality perspective, it's hard to take 2020 and 2021, even to certain aspects, 2022 data fully into effect, just because of the COVID impacts of travel. So most of our data and forward-looking projections are based on actual bookings that are happening in the future, and then travel trends from before 2020. We think that's just the right conservative way to go about it from a projection perspective. Let's see here. Next question. Can either you or I, Avery, explain optimization rate when assessing properties for short-term rentals? Are you familiar with optimization rates?
Optimization rate? No, I'll let you take that one.
Honestly, I'm not either. I was hoping you were. So fortunately, please ask the question a different way. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what that is pertaining to. Next question is about financing. What would you recommend from a finance perspective? Are mortgages for a second home possible? Will a bank take short-term rental income into account? What have you seen? I have some info on this too, but what have you seen when it comes to mortgages?
Yeah, so we see a total mix. My recommendation is, so a lot of people don't realize that the minimum down payment for a conventional investment loan is actually only 15%. Now, not all banks will let you do that, but the Fannie Mae requirement is only 15%. So if you call around enough, you can get 15% down on an investment conventional. We actually do that at our mortgage shop. So a lot of people get really hung up on that 10% down vacation home loan, because obviously it's only 10%. That I have been a big fan of it in the past. I've used them myself, but through the last 2 years of the whole boom, it started to make me really nervous, because I see a lot of people totally abusing that loan type and getting like 10 second home loans in the same market, and just kind of like really gray area skirting the rules. And it can be a really great option if you do plan to use it 2 weeks out of the year yourself, and you're just going to rent it out when you're not there, then knock yourself out with that 10% down loan. But when people start getting like 50 second home loans all over the country, well, you can't stay at 50 different places for 2 weeks out of the year. So I've never heard of anybody getting in trouble for mortgage fraud with those 10% second homes, but I don't want the first one that I hear about to be one of you guys. So my advice is, if you're running spreadsheets on a property, I'd just go ahead and get that 15% down conventional loan. We see a lot of DSCRs too. DSCR is a great option, but the interest rates are much higher and there are some prepayment penalties, things like that. So it really just depends, but we see a mix of that 10% second home, 15% or 20% investment and DSCR.
Yeah, and we have a partner. If you go to rabu.com, you'll see a lender partner that does DSCR loans for short-term rentals that actually utilize our data, because a lot of it is it's hard sometimes to find a lender who will take short-term rental revenue potential as part of their underwriting. So we found the lender does that. There are other groups that use our data as well as AirDNA's data to underwrite assets. So it's becoming more prominent, but it's still developing. So we recommend doing some diligence there. Let's see here. We got a couple more questions coming in. This one's going back to the ops side. Do you trust your cleaners and maintenance team members to provide supplies in the properties like toilet paper, things of that nature? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Avery. Yeah, same. I mean, that's why I mentioned earlier, you want to interview them and do some due diligence on them. What we do is we a lot of times send the cleaning supplies directly to our cleaner, and she just takes it, the toilet paper, all that stuff, or she fills the owner's closet up for us. So very common, but you want to become friendly with your cleaners and also pay them fairly, right?
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of kind of pushback on Airbnb because of cleaning fees, but it's just part of the business model. You need to make sure you're paying your cleaners well, because they're going to provide a better experience at the end of the day for your guests and for yourself. Let's see here. Do you have a target vacancy rate, or I guess you have a target occupancy rate when you operate your portfolio, Avery?
That's a really, really great question. And I'm really glad that you asked. So no, I don't have a target occupancy rate because several of my markets are seasonal. So here's an example that I like to give that if any of you have listened to me on anything before, you've probably heard it. And I'm sorry for being a mom and repeating myself. So I have two comparable properties, one in the Smoky Mountains, one in Destin, Florida. They're both 4 bedrooms. I bought them in the same year for roughly the same price. The Smoky Mountain property has an 85% occupancy rate, and the Destin house is lucky to get over 60%. So if you're only looking at occupancy rate, you would never buy the Destin house. But the Destin house makes about $45,000 a year more than the Smoky's house with the higher occupancy. So really that gross annual income is what I look at more than anything.
Yeah, 100% on the same page. Occupancy can be misconstrued. It's not difficult to have a high occupancy, especially if you don't charge enough for people to stay at your properties. So it's definitely one of those things that can be a false indicator of how well your asset is performing. A couple more questions because we're almost out of time here. How much money do you suggest for an investor to have in the bank for emergencies when they acquire their rentals?
I would say 6 months, but I know when you're trying to build up that down payment for the next one and the next one, that's a lot of money to just be sitting there in case of emergencies. So I would say don't get below 3 months, but I'd like to see 6 months in a perfect world.
I agreed. And then last question for today, and we might have to do this again, Avery, soon because there's a lot of questions coming in. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any advice on putting your property into a trust or an LLC when you acquire it, or do you recommend people just to put it in their own personal name?
It depends on what type of loan you're getting. So if you're getting a conventional, you have to put it in your personal name. If you're getting a DSCR, you may as well go ahead and put it in the LLC, because eventually, once you have enough properties, you're going to have to do some setup. I would recommend having a real attorney, not like LegalZoom or some $1,500 thing, a real attorney helping you set up your entity structure, because that's one thing that I don't want you to skimp on is either CPAs or attorneys don't go with the low cost option, because if you spend $1,500 2 or 3 times on LegalZoom to do a few LLCs, and then later on you have 20 properties and you go to a quote real attorney to really set you up, they're going to have to do a lot of undoing and unwinding if you did it wrong the first time. So definitely start with a good CPA and a good attorney, and they can really give you better advice on that than I can. Amen
to that. 100% the case. Again, Avery, thanks so much for joining. Why don't you just give us a quick rundown on how people can reach you and the short-term shop if they want to buying the next investment property?
Yeah. So you can reach me on Instagram. It's at the ShortTerm Shop. Or if you want to work with us in any of the markets that we operate in, you can go to the shorttermshop.com and click schedule a consultation. We have calls every Thursday. I'm actually about to start one now in 8 minutes. You can sign up for that at strquestions.com, but really just the website, ShortTerm Shop, theshorttermshop.com is where you can find everything.
Awesome. Again, Avery, you're awesome. Amazing content. Thank you for being so helpful. Thank you for teaching the investor community on how to build short-term rental portfolios. I know there's a couple questions that came in on if we'll share this podcast afterwards. Absolutely. We'll make it available to everyone who's joined today. And we'll also put it on all the podcast channels as well. So we'll share an email after this call with details on that. And again, if you guys enjoyed this podcast, make sure to continue joining us in future ones and use the data.rabu tools to help you find your next short-term rental investment property as well. Appreciate it, guys. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Amir.